mysterious stories.
Number 4. Japan's human experiments throughout the time of World War II. Japan believed it could win by employing biological weapons that had previously been prohibited for use in warfare. Unit 731 was the name of a bioweapon research unit that broke every rule. When Japan conquered a portion of China in the 1930s, Unit 731 establishes research stations for some of the most heinous human experiments ever documented. Despite the fact that Unit 731 initially claims to exist to aid the public in the fight against disease, in reality, they are committing atrocities against prisoners of war. For instance, 40 Japanese doctors are led to prison one day. They come across 2 prisoners who have their hands tied at the back of their backs. They shot the prisoners twice in the stomach. Following that, the doctors are divided into teams and instructed to get rid of the bullets without administering any painkillers or anesthesia to the prisoners. While this is going on, other doctors are performing battlefield amputations and others are cutting into their windpipes for another surgical maneuver. It appears that the human experiments are literally torn apart while they are still alive. Other studies looked into the effects of frostbite to see if there was a way to send back it once it had set in. It seems that the human test subjects are put outside in bitterly cold weather with their arms and legs exposed to achieve this. Guards could march by and throw freezing water on their limbs to hasten the process until they turned black with frostbite. After that, they were placed in pools of varying temperatures to see if they could get back feeling and control of their extremities. The majority of people who passed away due to illness froze to death or were unable to cope with the shock of losing a limb. It looks like ceramic bombs, cluster bombs, and bombs containing plague-infected fleas were also tested. Human experiment subjects were tied to stakes in fixed positions to test the effectiveness of the bombs at various blast radiuses. Those who did not pass away immediately were in agony, clinging to a post to yell and make an emotional appeal until their injuries were fatal. Other studies looked at the influences of pressure, and it seems that humans were put in a pressure chamber and gradually increased the pressure until their eyes exploded from their skulls. Aside from the prisoners, the local population did not also feel secure from Unit 731. Anthrax, plague, cholera, and other contaminants were sprayed over villages and towns by researchers using an airplane. Unit 731 researchers would check the dead bodies and take notes to determine which weapons were the most lethal after the community slowly and painfully passed away. It is estimated that between 300 and 580,000 people died in this manner. When World War II came to an end, Unit 731's experiments became increasingly hopeless. In particular, they were the owner of one operation, codenamed Cherry Blossoms at Night, that planned to spread disease across America using plague-infested pilots. Despite the fact that these planes were supposed to dive-bomb the California coast, the event never took place. When the war ended, even though Unit 731 attempted to dynamite all proof of their wrongdoings, a great deal of spine-chilling information was found. On the other hand, the prisoners were deliberately and violently killed with poisonous gas and machine gunfire. Those who remained getting up were thrown into the river, where they drowned. There was not anybody that survived to be rescued. Number 3. The scientific sadist to the outside world. It seemed that Bob Berdella was a weird fellow who ran Bob's Bizarre Bazaar, a store full of oddities. According to customers, he was arrogant and smelled strange. He thought he was an excellent choice for bringing culture to a desolate part of Kansas City. His personal life, on the other hand, was far more twisted and horrifying than any of the merchandise he put on sale. A male drug addict is picked up by Berdella one day and he promises to deliver prescription drugs to his house. When they arrive, he ties the victim, who will not be identified for privacy reasons, to his bed. There, he inflicts pain on him indefinitely. It seems that Berdella begins by using wire cables to shock the man's genitals while he takes pictures for later enjoyment. He doesn't come to an end until the victim makes as if to be unconscious. Berdella goes out of the room after putting a burlap sack over his head. He returns, viciously uses an iron bar to beat him over the head, and then flees. Berdella returns a third time, this time injecting a needle full of Drano into his throat. Berdella does this in an attempt to get rid of the vocal cords, permitting his victims to no longer yell. He then dabs his victim's eyes with bleach-soaked Q-tips. The victim later remembers how the burning pain was excruciating and his eyes swelled shut. Berdella probably went out of the room every time to make another entry in his journal of human torture experiments. It wasn't his first time being a victim. Berdella had a wealth of knowledge. He took pleasure in inflicting pain on young men to death and recording their reactions in a notebook. In this journal, he devised his own code of vulgar acronyms to refer to everything he did to them, including the positions in which he treated badly them. This was done so he could go back over them later and relive the torture in his head without missing any details. T seemed that everything from grocery store produce to electricity was used in the torture acts. He once attempted to rip a man's eye out just to see how it felt. From 1984 to 1988, 47 people were announced missing, and Berdella appears to be responsible for the majority of them. Berdella attends to his victims' injuries over the next few days. For days, the poor man drifts in and out of wakefulness, drugged up on animal tranquilizers, blinded and unable to speak. Berdella maintains the television on so loud that it is impossible to tell if he is still in the room. The man is forced to sit and listen in constant fear of his tormentor's return. After 4 days of being tied to a bed, the victim persuades Berdella to change the way the ropes are tied. Berdella pays attention, and his victim can later control the knots just enough to have a limited range of motion. On the 5th day, he manages to take a nearby pack of matches and burn the ropes away. His eyes have made better sufficiently for him to be able to see one more time, and he looks down from the window. Because Berdella is the owner of vicious guard dogs in his backyard below, the victim opens the window and creeps along the ledge. Despite the fact that the ledge collapses, he falls into an area where the dogs cannot reach him. The only person to survive Berdella's lair does so nakedly, and he is quickly apprehended by authorities. Following his arrest, the county employs a real estate agent to determine the value of his home. According to the real estate agent's description, she saw enormous guard dogs in cages in the backyard, as well as disturbed paintings of people screaming throughout the house. The kitchen seemed to be the worst of all. It seemed to be simple, with 2 large stainless steel tables in the center for dismembering bodies. And one of the tables even had a sink with a massive industrial garbage disposal that there is not anyone that would ever need. In 1992, Bob Berdella passed away in prison due to a heart attack.
Talk about the torture pretty much, because I was awake through most of that. At this one time when he hooked these cables up to my...
Number 2. The CIA loves LSD. LSD, also known as acid on the street, is a psychedelic drug that is the cause of colorful hallucinations and intense thought patterns in its users. The American government was concentrating on conducting its own LSD research in the early 1950s, long before anyone knew about the drug, and they weren't frightened to use the unwilling public as test subjects. It appears that the Central Intelligence Agency was put responsible for the MKUltra program. Their aim was to see if LSD could be used to control people's minds in different ways. They were thinking of using it as a truth serum or to clean an agent's mind after they reach retirement age, or even to make people obey commands. MKUltra seemed to experiment with a particular test known as Operation Midnight Climax. Apartments were hired in San Francisco and New York by the CIA, and they disguised them as brothels for this operation. After that, they paid prostitutes $100 per night to entice clients back to the apartments and inject LSD into their drinks. They were required to smoke marijuana from time to time instead. The CIA was watching and capturing the client's every move through a one-way mirror the whole time. This seemed to continue until 1964, when the final CIA outpost was quietly closed down. There was another aspect of Operation Midnight Climax that was the infiltration of the government. For this experiment, CIA agents would take up a position as members of various activist groups and administer LSD to them in order to study their reactions. At one point, the CIA even employed professional stage magicians to teach Secret Service agents how to sneak LSD into someone's drink without being discovered. By the end of the operation, the US government had forced thousands of people to take psychedelic drugs against their will using taxpayer funds. Number 1. The young poisoner. In the 1960s, Graham Young seemed to be a skin and bones teenager living just outside of London who was grudge-bearing about life. When he was less than 3 months old, his mother passed away due to tuberculosis. Throughout this time, his bereaved father sent him to live with his aunt, a distant relative with whom he never connected. When Graham's father married again and brought him back home, he despised his new stepmother more than anyone else he had ever despised. Graham's lack of affection would later permit him to experiment on his whole family and innumerable others without feeling pity or remorse. It appears that Graham is given a chemistry kit and it takes him the majority of his time alone to study his two favorite subjects, chemistry and Nazi history. Without a doubt, Nazi experiments inspired him to continue multiple poisoning sprees shortly after. Christopher Williams, his only childhood friend, seems to be his first victim. Graham appears to sneak poison into his friend's sandwiches almost every day while they have lunch with each other. It wasn't long before Christopher started to be ejected matter from the stomach through the mouth, experienced severe headaches, developed a fever, and missed school on a regular basis due to exhaustion. According to doctors, he seemed to be suffering from a severe and prolonged case of the flu and did not suspect anything else. While Christopher is absent from school, he and Graham visit the zoo. Graham brings some poisoned lemonade with him and gives it to Christopher under the guise of friendship. Despite the fact that his friend is alive, his suffering continues. Graham is still only 13 years old. Despite the fact that he is keen on poisoning Christopher as often as he can, it's not often enough to meet his sick desires. He needed to push himself even further. Because he needed test subjects he could constantly monitor, he inserted poison into family meals. He seems to poison certain parts of the meal and keep the uncontaminated portions for himself. It appears that Graham has the ability to obtain the poison he requires by bewitching local chemists. To put them at ease, he gives an explanation that he was a non-dangerous young scientist himself and that he needs ingredients to experiment with. He would sometimes even persuade him that he was a college student in order for them to sign the release forms, giving him access to a stable supply of poison. Graham was using antimony poison, which was used in the 1960s to make batteries and other ordinary products. It is easily poisonous when used in powder form. At first, it causes fever, vomiting, and other symptoms bearing resemblance to the flu. It causes hair loss and nerve-ending death over time as a result of repeated exposures. Graham's victims frequently experience numbness that begins in the fingers and progresses to hot, shooting pains throughout the body when they gradually suffer. Despite the fact that Graham has a twisted mind, it is quite scientific, as you can probably tell. When his family grows sicker and sicker around him, he holds detailed logs the whole time. It seems that each entry includes the poison's dosage as well as its effect. For instance, if his mother begins to eject matter from the stomach through the mouth, he will note how many grams it took to cause that reaction. Despite the fact that his family eventually recognizes they are being poisoned, they have no idea it was done on purpose. Instead, they believe Graham inadvertently contaminated some of their kitchen utensils while conducting chemistry experiments, which is why they were all becoming violently ill. Graham's main target is his stepmother, Molly, whom he has despised since childhood. Over the course of a year, he tortures her stomach with tiny doses and takes great pleasure in her anguish. Graham's father finds his wife rolling around in pain in the garden in April 1962. It seems that Graham observes the action from the window. His father raises his head, and the two lock gazes. He discovers that his son appears to be emotionless. Doctors at the hospital were baffled by Molly's symptoms. According to her, she expresses a desire to return home and prepare dinner. Despite the fact that she died hours later, and Graham could stop there, but his compulsions prevent him from doing so. He tortures his bereaved family even more with poison, all the while keeping detailed logs of his human experiments. His father and sister would both suffer permanent liver damage as a result of his cruelty. Graham becomes preoccupied with his father's plight. Other than a morbid fascination with death, he has no reason to do this. According to all records, despite the fact that his father had never particularly wronged him, he chose to poison him more than the others. Doctors started to suspect poisoning when his father was admitted to the hospital one day with flu-like symptoms. Graham begins lecturing them when the doctors speculate aloud about what poison it could have been. His knowledge of the subject terrified everyone, including his father, and made him suspicious. Graham's chemistry teacher discovers the poison he uses in the boy's desk during class one day, while Graham is concentrating on making his family's lives miserable. He contacts Graham's family doctor, who contacts a psychiatrist, who joins the police in questioning Graham. They act as if they are only keen on his impressive knowledge of chemistry and make no mention of the fact that he is a suspect in a murder case. And Graham demonstrates his knowledge of poisonous chemicals, and the police are persuaded enough to apprehend him. He seems to be sentenced to 15 years in the Broadmoor psychiatric facility at the age of 14. Throughout his stay, he poisons those around him with soap and no matter what else he can find. It appears that he even uses a laurel bush to extract cyanide so that he can kill one of the inmates. Even after he confesses to the staff, they are not convinced by him and classify his death as a suicide. As a bright young man, he can eventually persuade the staff that he is restored to normality and is released at the age of 23. Graham, as a free citizen, makes up his mind to keep experimenting on people with poisons. His new preferred chemical element seems to be thallium. This is a weighty metal that was once used in the photography industry to make camera lenses. Previously, it was a kind of rat poison. Thallium appears to be odorless, colorless, and tasteless, and it dissolves easily in water, the ideal poison. Graham gets a job at one of the only 2 factories in the whole country that has the poison he requires, thanks to a glowing recommendation from Broadmoor. Shortly after beginning work, at least 10 of his co-workers begin to immediately suffer from an unknown illness. It appears those closest to him are the sickest. Bob Egley appears to be his favorite prey. For 2 months, the poor associate suffers from stomach pains and numbness throughout his body, as well as hallucinations. Doctors are stumped when he arrives at the hospital. He spent the entire time explaining his ailments to Graham, who made as if to be his friend while dutifully taking notes in his journal. When Bob passed away, Graham persuades his widow to dispose of the body by burning it to ashes in order to conceal all evidence. Fred Biggs is the next co-worker who is heavily targeted. Soon after, he passed away in the same manner. At this point, 2 people have died, and all of the workers are concerned. There seems to be a doctor who conducts an investigation into the workplace and comes to the conclusion that the deaths were caused by a flu virus. However, when Graham starts asking the doctor too many questions, his co-workers become suspicious. He does, in fact, speak briefly of the possibility of thallium poisoning. His co-workers get in touch with the police, and criminal investigators begin looking into his background. When they discover his history of poisoning, they search his home for evidence. The poison and the scientific journal can be found among the Nazi memorabilia. It lists all of Graham's co-workers, their dosages, and the effects, just like it did with his family. It appeared that Graham was sentenced to life in prison for these crimes. Throughout the proceedings, he never expressed regret and stated that he felt nothing but emptiness. He, on the other hand, desperately wanted to be recalled. A note he gave to a courtroom journalist required that he be made well known for his crimes. After that, he seemed to pass away in 1990, at the age of 42. It is believed that he poisoned himself as a last-ditch effort. Thanks for checking out this video. Be sure to subscribe because I upload a new video every day. Or if you're still not convinced, here are some of my other videos that I think you'd like. Enjoy.